The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the ACEC Wisconsin May quarterly webinar. My name is Russ Nicloy, and I'll be presenting on how to build effective assemblies. Just a little bit about who I am for those of you who I haven't met yet. I'm a civil drafting and solution specialist at Macer Technologies. That's my own company providing drafting solutions to organizations across the state and across the country. I've come from a production of experience of about 10 years prior to joining a reseller that I was with for 13 years. A lot of the experience that I had in both of those areas leads into the things that I'm presenting today. Also, a lot of work that I've done with Wisconsin DOT during the implementation and the evolution of their Civil 3D standards. So we've gotten to see a lot of the aspects of the transportation specific to WisDOT as we progress in Civil 3D. Currently, I'm a consultant member of the Methods Development Unit that's focusing on training. From time to time, if you look at the training videos from WisDOT, you may hear my voice in there as well. So a little bit about what we're going to cover today. 4 main topics. We're going to look at why connecting subassemblies are critical. You just can't get close. You have to do it correctly, and there are real consequences if you don't. Also, reusing design and reducing work. You don't have to recreate your designs and recreate the wheel, as it were. There are things that you can use to manipulate the parts that you're using so that they can be used in other areas. Then we'll talk a little bit about techniques for tracking assemblies throughout a project. Some real simple steps can help this, and again, has some great consequences down the road for you as you're working, especially when you're in the process of targeting assemblies or targeting subassemblies to alignments or profiles, etc. So some great things there. And finally, conditional subassemblies. Now, I'm going to state right up front, I am biased towards conditional subassemblies. I'm a big fan of what they can do. I've seen them help users and designs get done more efficiently. However, there are strengths and weaknesses, and we would be incorrect if we didn't look at both so that you are an informed user of the tools, and in some cases it may not be what you need or may not provide what you want. So just making sure that you can have one assembly that does the work of many when it's appropriate to your project. So with that, let's jump into the why are connecting subassemblies so critical? And this is a screenshot from something that happened years ago. I haven't seen this happen a lot since, but what happened was we got a support call that said, we've got a super elevation, but the shoulder is not moving along with the super elevation. We can't figure out why. When I got to see the picture, this is what I saw, and like, oh wow, that's not exactly what I expected, but okay. It took a little while to kind of backtrack through it, but it turned out that the shoulder was not properly connected to the lane, and therefore when the lanes were super elevating, it just stopped where it was. When you were in a normal situation, when you weren't super elevating, the shoulder looked fine because it was built right up against the lane. It's just when this particular situation occurred, that's when it became visible. Now, I've got to admit that I did have to doctor the photo because I could not get it to do this anymore. So some of the problems may have been addressed in other ways. But this, to me, is the hallmark of why you need to be careful with subassemblies being connected correctly. So, and why is it critical? Well, it's because data doesn't flow if it's not corrected. You wouldn't take 2 electrical wires and just place them down together. You would, strap them together and connect them properly, make sure that they're wound correctly, so they're not going to come apart. Just laying them next to each other is not going to be a long-term solution, even if it is a short-term solution. Now, one of the things that's going on is that the assembly, and notice I'm making a differentiation here. The assembly is the brains of the corridor design, and therefore it is gathering the point codes, link codes, shape codes, all of the data about the subassemblies out to the sides and bringing it all into one place so that the corridor can access it quickly and appropriately. Now, what that means is if things aren't connected correctly, that's the information that's not coming back. That first picture is kind of an extreme version of that, but you may not get the things that you're expecting out of your corridor if they are not properly connected. So what that does mean is that proper connection does not include O-snaps. And that's hard for me to say, especially for users who are longtime AutoCAD and or Civil 3D users, because O-snaps is just one of the ways that we make sure things are connected correctly in every other area of our drafting. In the case of subassemblies, though, we do have to go with an alternative method, and I will show that during the demonstration portion. Also, the AutoCAD copy, move, and mirror commands are not available. It has something to do with the way that the coding has gone on under the hood for the subassembly parts, that the AutoCAD version of these commands does not work. Now, as I say here, there are alternatives, and I will be showing you where they're located if you haven't seen them or aren't familiar with them. But those copy, move, and mirror commands are very specific to subassemblies, and they only appear to you when you're working with assemblies and subassemblies. Now, the other problem is that a misconnect subassembly is very difficult to troubleshoot. It manifests itself in different ways and not always the same way every time. One of the things that I've noticed is that in the Assembly Properties Construction tab, even if you have a left and a right group on your screen, you know that you've built some to the left, you suddenly won't have a left side in the properties area. So that's one thing that tends to help us troubleshoot it, but that may not even be a problem in some instances. The other one is that subassemblies act against expectations, which is just a fancy way of saying they act weird. And anyone who's ever tried to troubleshoot something knows that the fluke weirdness is hard to troubleshoot, hard to kind of backtrack and figure out what's wrong. A lot of times something is going weird and it's the last resort, like, hey, why don't you just rebuild that subassembly and see if that helps? And there it is. And we can assume from that that there was a bad connection. So let's go over and take a look at Civil 3D. I've got some things in our screen here. Lower left are some assemblies. I'm going to look at the top two on the left there. This one right here has a subassembly missing, and I'm going to put that in. I'm going to bring up the WIS.design tab of the ribbon, although I'm not actually going to use any WIS.subassemblies for this directly. Actually, I'm going to use the Autodesk subassemblies in this particular case, but everything I'm showing you here does apply to the WIS.ones as well. I'm going to go to the lanes. There we are. I'm going to bring in the shoulder. I'm sorry, shoulder for this one. And we would go in and set these to the parameters that we need. Notice that even though the side is left, I'll be going to the right. Civil 3D can figure that out. But what you do want to do is make sure that you zoom in on the circle points or the point codes of the assemblies and make sure that you attach to that. Now, this is the correct way to connect things. Anywhere on the circle or that point that is not overlapping something else. If you grab in this area here, there's a very real possibility, because of draw order considerations, that you'll be grabbing the subassembly part instead of the point code, or maybe a different point code. Now, a lot of those problems are easily found because you're snapping to something very different and it jumps to a different part. It's not what you expected it to do immediately. But in this case, I'm going to left click here and drop that subassembly in. Now I'm going to let go of that, just hit enter to let go. I'll back up, and now I want you to take a look at these two assemblies. Besides the width of the shoulder, what's different about them? Well, this is a trick question. This one was connected correctly. This one was not connected correctly. There are parts that are not correctly connected here, but you can't tell that by looking at it. Even if I zoom in a bit and look at it, things look like they're correctly snapped together, and that's because graphically they are, but not in the sense of the assembly. So if I go into the assembly properties of this, I'll go into the construction tab, and there you can see there's no left-hand side, where clearly you can see that there are parts to the left hand. Also, there's only two things here, and you can clearly see there's at least four that I can identify from this view. This is the quintessential marker that we've got a real problem with connections here. So I'm going to close that and hit escape. Now, to fix this, sometimes you can get lucky and you can select the subassembly and come up here and you'll see that there's copy, move, and mirror. You could just move that into position or mirror it into position. And again, it manifests itself in different ways. Something has gone wrong here where I don't even have the move, copy, and mirror commands that are appropriate for subassemblies, being very specific about that. And the same is true of the shoulder over here. It also doesn't have the options there. So unfortunately, in this case, we're going to have to delete these two sides here, but I'm going to grab the two from the other side, go up to the mirror, and mirror that over. Now I'm jumping ahead a little bit because I'm showing you a tool I'm going to talk about more later, but really what I've done there is copied and swapped that over to the other side. If I go to the assembly properties now with it properly connected, the construction tab now shows a left and a right side. By the way, this is a good point to mention this, that assemblies over the last couple of releases of Civil 3D have become more tuned into what's on the right and what's on the left, and also they start at the top and work their way down. So anything that's connected, if you wanted to see something that's coming later, it has to show up beforehand here. So we have a right and left side, and everything's looking good. I'll click OK and hit Escape to let go of that. And I will back up a little bit because there's some other assemblies here that we're going to look at in a second. But I'm going to pop back over here and let's go in and take a look at the reuse, design, and reducing work. As I mentioned, this is where you can move information from one assembly to another or different parts of an assembly so that you don't have to keep recreating it. If you've got a lane that's a certain width, a certain slope, and has certain depths to the materials, why, if you need that in other assemblies, would you go in and enter all three of those bits of information and probably more information every time? What you can do is copy it or simply move it to a new location, or as you saw earlier, mirror it into a new location so that you don't have to keep entering that data in. Now, the reality is that a lot of times that we've got a lot of similar information, but there are a couple fields here and there that aren't the same. What you want to do there is you can still move or copy or mirror, but then when you get the location of the new part or the new subassembly part, you can go into that individual subassembly and tweak what is different about it. That way you're not filling in 10 fields when really all you need to fill in is 1 or 2 and have the rest of it brought over as a copy. So again, the copy to, move to, and mirror are specialized versions of the tools that are built specifically for the subassemblies themselves and how they're coded under the hood. Copy assemblies, now, and actually, and again, I have to kind of make a distinction here. You can copy assemblies with the AutoCAD copy. The subassemblies you can't, but the assemblies you can. And one of the benefits is if you have the same assembly or generally the same assembly in several different regions, again, copy the whole assembly and then go in and make the tweak changes that you need to after you've got them in place, if there's any differences at all. Now, one of the things that we've learned at WISDOT with the best practices and so forth is that when you copy an assembly or use an assembly in multiple regions, it's better to make a copy of it so that you have individual assemblies for each region, and then name those assemblies by the station that they're in. The information here, or the reason we do that is important because if you have one assembly that's in 3 different regions, but you need one of those regions to be slightly different, so you go in and tweak the assembly, you've now tweaked it in all 3 regions. By copying the assembly, making it unique and naming it something specific to the individual regions that it's in, you can go in and make a change to one assembly without affecting the other 2. Now the question comes up, what if that change happens in the other 2? Well, this is a safety device, so going in and tweaking it in the 3 different regions or the 3 different assemblies is kind of the price that we pay for that. But I think for the protection mechanism that it provides, the problem is if you make a change in 1 and it changes in 3, you may never notice that until it's too late, or you may not notice it and somebody else notices it when it gets out to the field and things aren't quite right. So it's a safety device. Also, another thing that you could do to reduce work is instead of having an assembly that comes before, let's say, a ramp design where you have a lane that kind of peels away, instead of having an individual region for that and then a region for when it does start to ramp or whatever your design is doing, place a lane or a subassembly part that has a 0 width in it and then target it to an alignment or a polyline or what have you. The idea here is that way you have one less region to manage, but you also have the ability to create that extra lane, whether it be a turn lane or, as I say here, a ramp type design in particular. So these are things that can be very useful. Now, if you're not quite seeing this in your mind's eye, don't worry. I'm going to do this in the demonstration here. I just wanted to point it out that placing a 0 width subassembly is not a bad idea in some situations. So let's hop back over to Civil 3D so we can take a look at that as an option. First of all, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to grab this assembly right here. I've got some things in my roadway here. I need a region 1 and a region 2 that are similar. So I'm going to grab the assembly, and then I'm going to right click and use the basic modify tools copy. Like I said, the copy, move, and mirror does not work for the subassemblies, but it does work for the assemblies. I'm going to use copy. Some people do the whole window select on an assembly, and I believe that's still okay. In early days, if you tried that, sometimes it broke the assembly apart. So I generally just grab the assembly when I'm copying it. But there I've placed a new location. I'm going to hit escape to drop the old one. But as I mentioned, one of the best practices is make sure that these assemblies know what region or what station area they're working with. If I go into the assembly properties for the first one there, the new one, you'll notice that it has the main road 0 to 236 with a parenthetical number behind it. That parenthetical number is there so that Autodesk can make sure that it is a unique name and number. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and change this so that it is to 1 plus 50. And I can take out that parenthetical number because it is now a unique station range there. I'll click OK, hit escape. I'm going to grab the other assembly here and right click, go into assembly properties, the other way to get to assembly properties, by the way. I'll go into this, and in this one, I'm going to change this one to 1 plus 50. Notice I don't have a parenthetical number to worry about in this case. And I'll click OK. Now when I make this corridor later on, I'll be able to use this one for before the intersection and this one for after the intersection, or some such design need such as that. Now another one that I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab this through lane. Actually, this is going to be, is intended for the through lane through the intersection here. But what I'm going to do is I like the pavement that I had selected there. So again, I'm going to right click and basic modify tools copy. I'm going to copy that down to the bottom here. And I've got some other parts that I need to use here. So I'm going to grab the shoulder from the right-hand side, and I'm going to go up to the copy, move, and mirror in the green context ribbon. So it is subassembly specific. I'll say copy, zoom in on the point code and drop that in. And I'm actually going to do this again, but this time I'm going to grab, actually I kind of want to show this because one of the things I've done is you could copy this lane down here next to it for the ramp or for the turn lane or what have you. I do want to show that this is possible. I'm going to select on the subassembly part, come to copy, and then zoom in and copy that subassembly to itself. Feels a little weird, but it does work. And it does accept that as a correct way to set that up. Now that lane I intend to be a 0 width. But putting it as a 0 width right now is problematic because I also need that shoulder attached to this, and if it's 0, it's going to have trouble figuring out which one I'm looking at. So I'm going to click on the shoulder, copy that down, and attach that to that point right there. Now I'm going to go into, I'm going to hit escape because I still have that shoulder selected. I'll select on that lane, go into the subassembly properties, parameters. Right now it's on the left-hand side, but the width is 12. I'm going to move this over so you can see it happen. I'll do 0 for that and then OK. And now that subassembly is still there, it's just a 0 width. And when we go into the corridor and target it, it will be able to, pull it from that 0 state and be able to target it along this line here. That's our intent later on. Now to prove that out, I'm going to go into the assembly properties here, and go into the construction tab, and you can see on the left-hand side we have lane left, and shoulder left. Now right now this is the point where I can see a problem in our future. This has consequences. The left-hand lane and the lane to the left, they're named the exact same thing. Very easy later on in our process to get those confused. So now's a great time to do it. I could rename this in the subassembly properties that I used earlier. I just changed the width and moved on. And then now I'm looking at it. I can do this in the assembly properties as well. I'll just left click and make that show up. Now I'm going to name this ramp dash left. Dash left. There we are. So that later on in the targeting, we'll see a lane left and a ramp left, and we'll know immediately which one's which. I say this a lot about a lot of other products or projects that we work on, or items that we work on, and that is a logical name goes a very long way in your project use of it later on. So with that will help us out later. I'll say OK to that, and I'll hit escape. And then that one we will be using a little bit later on, and I'll come back to it. So let's head back to our slide deck here and look at techniques for tracking assemblies through the project. Now, my hope is a lot of you are already aware of these. You probably use them in your everyday design efforts and so forth. But for those who don't know of it or don't realize that it happens for assemblies as well as other objects, this will be something useful, hopefully. There are so many assemblies that get used, especially in the larger projects, that is very easy to get confused as to which one you're looking at, and you need to be able to zoom to it from a different location. Many times you're looking at the corridor and you're nowhere near where the assemblies are actually piled up or stacked. And so what I'm about to show you is the ability to find it wherever it is. And that is that in the prospector, the assemblies area, you can right-click on the assembly you're looking for and zoom to that assembly in the drawing. Now, even if you pick the wrong one, or what I would prefer to say as one that's in the neighborhood but you weren't sure the name of, if you pick the wrong one and zoom to that, at least you'll be closer. You'll be where the stack of assemblies is located. Now, by the way, most organizations that I've seen and most users that I've seen do this, they do stack their assemblies together, and I should probably put this as its own point here. Putting all your assemblies in one area, kind of in a visual library, if you will, can be very helpful. However, with a zoom to function, you don't even need to do that necessarily. You can kind of section them off and put them in different parts of the screen and use the zoom to get to them. And this is the extra credit point here, and it's by the way, zoom to is used for other objects. In particular, alignments, which can be short or long, just sometimes hidden under corridors, very hard to see. The zoom to option is a great one for that. Maybe you've got several surfaces in a file for grading or what have you. The zoom to operates for that, or profile views, you can zoom to those as well. So the zoom to function in the prospector area for the different objects is something that you want to be aware of and use. So other tracking techniques, you've already seen me kind of dip into this a little bit, and that is name the assemblies and the subassemblies as you create them. There's no time like the present, and if you're anything like me, you'll get involved in something else and forget to do it. If you don't do it the minute that you build it, it will slip on by and you'll forget until you start to target and realize that you've got 13 left-hand lanes and you don't know which one's which, and now you wish that you had gone and named them. That's when I stop my targeting, go over to the assemblies, go in and fill in the names and kind of backtrack to where I should have done in the first place. Naming the assemblies, as we've seen earlier, is just as important as the sub-assemblies, because finding what you're working on and where you want to tweak things is important, and naming them will help that. Now, making them unique names, they don't have to be very long, but having a unique item to them, like you saw that I have a left-hand lane and a ramp lane, that just being unique like that is enough to help out. As I stated, it will help the targeting later, and this is usually where most of the problems or where most of the mistargeted areas happen or the problems happen, but I'm sure in other areas it will help as well. It will also help for troubleshooting processes. So if something is acting a little funny and you have to backtrack or reverse engineer what went on, having logical names in these areas will help you do that. It also helps new users that get added to the project because they're coming in cold and don't know what the intent of certain things were and why did you design it this way. Having the name in those unique names in those locations will help them reverse engineer as well. So with that, let's take a look at Civil 3D here. And I'm going to go in here, and I'm actually going to select on the assembly because I can get to all of the sub-assemblies from that location, but you could do each one individually. I'll go into the assembly properties here. This says through intersection. Remember, I used the through intersection as a copy. I brought it down. I'm going to say it's not the through intersection anymore. This is the east assembly, or something that is equally as descriptive, short, and so forth. I'm going to go from 236 to, actually, I need to go from 341, so I'm going to delete these out, and I'll say 212 plus 00, the longest region I've ever worked on, I believe. I'll click OK. I'm going to go to the construction tab. I almost short-circuited this again. This one does have the ramp left-hand lane here. Notice what we have here is the name of the object and then the side that it's on. If you mirror an object over, sometimes those get lost in there. So you'll be on the left-hand side, but you'll see the lane says to the right, some oddities such as that. By the way, gotcha on the mirroring command here. If I go into the lane left and scroll down to the subassembly, I'm sorry, the super elevation area, notice this one did have none, but if it had a side assigned to it, left or right-hand side, that can get caught in the mirror. What it's doing, the mirror is doing, is swapping the side, but it doesn't necessarily change the super elevation side. In fact, it doesn't. And that's an area that you can get caught. So this is one of those things that while you're checking this, you check the left lane. If you had to change the name, immediately think, hey, I've got to look at the super elevation here. So with those in place, short, just unique, you can add bits to it so that others can understand better what's going on here. Like this is shoulder. Maybe it's the 8-foot portion of the shoulder when you have a 10-foot in other areas. You can put that text there. Putting more information earlier in the name is better because some of the dialog boxes that we will look at later, and this is true for alignments, profiles, and subassembly parts, sometimes those boxes aren't long enough to show the whole name, so the more important information up front and then more description but less important towards the back of the name can be a helpful way to do this. So I'll say okay to that. By the way, I'm zoomed in on this assembly here. In fact, I'm going to kind of gameplay this a little bit and say that, hey, I'm doing some work on the profile here. Oh, I need to go to the assembly. I'll go to the prospector tool, assemblies dropdown, and there you can see all of the assemblies that we're working with there. Now you just saw me rename that assembly East Assembly 3+41. I'll right click on that and zoom to. It takes me right to that assembly there. Now I could also go to right click and zoom to one of the other ones and it's going to take me to that. If I'd accidentally zoomed to this, I can zoom back and there, at least I'm near my stack and I might be able to figure out which one I'm working with. So many of these look the same that I'm actually going to come in here and make sure that I'm looking at the right one. East Assembly, oh, there it is. I'll zoom to and be able to work on that one specifically. So now let's look at the conditional subassemblies and strengths and weaknesses. Like I said, I am a fan of this. I saw it happen, saw it work very nicely very early on. There was a project we were working on that was about a mile worth of road, so not a very large project. But there were 13 or so driveways to the left and to the right of this roadway. And using conventional methods, that turned out to be about 34 different regions. You had some that didn't have any driveways, some to the left, some to the right, but there were also some that had left and right because the driveways were overlapping, if you will, on the left and the right-hand side. That particular project, we were able to get down to one assembly for the entire length of that 1 mile stretch by using conditional subassemblies, saying, hey, where there are no driveways, this is what you do, but if you have a driveway on the left or on the right, do this or that and put in the driveway construction. The nice thing about subassembly or conditional subassemblies is that they understand left and right, and so the right-hand side won't get confused with the left-hand side unless you accidentally target things incorrectly. So there is a gotcha in there somewhere. So a couple of strengths before we get into the full list here. One is that the conditional subassemblies can replace multiple assemblies and regions. This is more about project management, and so that you don't have to manage all these different regions. On a longer project, there are going to be enough regions as it is. If you can cut them down with conditional subassemblies, that can be useful and helpful. You can also have more than one found condition at a location. My example here is a lot of times I showed driveways because that's the one that kind of turned my head towards conditional subassemblies. But what happens if you've got, well, a driveway here and there, but also we've got a sidewalk that comes up to the back of curb that we want to react to, or some kind of loading ramp, or some kind of different kind of material that we need to replace. You could say that the corridor assembly that we're working with could work in all three of those different conditions by using three different found conditions at that location. So again, preventing you from having different numbers of regions when all you have to do is tell the assembly to look for a line or some kind of target that would start that to happen. Now, a couple of weaknesses. The first one that I see, and I see this a lot with users, and that is that you do need to target both the found and not found condition. If you don't, and that sounds silly because you can't prove a negative, but in this case, we are literally proving a negative. What you're going to do is say that the conditional subassembly for the found is going to do the driveway stuff, but the not found is going to put in the regular curb and gutter, or what your normal original design information is in those conditions. If you don't give a not found condition to the regular curb and gutter, or to the driveway areas, if you will, then you'll get both. I do plan on showing this. I'm hoping that it will be visually obvious. A lot of times things are overlapping in this kind of condition, so it may be difficult to see, but I hope to point it out so everybody can see the consequences of not having the not found assigned. Another weakness is that the more conditional subassemblies that you have, the more complex and the more assignments that you need to maintain. There is a diminishing return to all of this, in that if you've got 34 regions and you want to replace it with a conditional subassembly, that's great. But if you have 4 or 5 conditional subassembly areas that you're working on, now you're having to manage more conditional subassemblies than you would regions. And that can become problematic in and of itself. So conditional subassemblies are not always the answer in every situation, but in a lot of situations you should at least investigate them and take a second or two to think through, will this work nicely here, or is it something that I should just make another region in? I get a lot of quizzical stares when people who know I love conditional subassemblies ask for help on something like that. And I say, you know what, it might be something you just do another region for. And like, well, the conditional subassembly will do it. Like, yeah, but you're actually spending more time doing that than you are with the new regions. So keep that in mind. Now, I label this next one as strength and weakness. I think it's a good thing, but it is something that can get missed, therefore can be a weakness as well. Something you just need to be aware of, and that is conditional targets are triggers. They are not geographic targets. So I can tell you where the driveway is with a conditional subassembly, but it won't necessarily draft in how wide my pavement needs to be to match up where the driveway front or back is, or wherever my conditional target is. If you want it to be, if you want a certain line to be both the trigger that turns it on as well as the geographic assignment, that will take 2 separate assignments. And actually, if you look up above, it takes 3. You've got a found, not found, and also the geographic target. Again, I will be showing this as an example. So if you're not quite seeing this in your mind's eye, you will get a chance to see it in practice. In fact, let's hop back over here to the tools. I'm going to go to this assembly down here. Now, I know this is supposed to be for the eastern part of our roadway, but I'm going to kind of short circuit this so you can see it, see some of the corridor in its construction. I'm going to go over here to the shoulder. I'm going to go to the generic tab, which is not on my tabs right now. Go to the generic tab. I'm sorry, conditional tab, just right below the generic. There is a conditional cut fill that is for depths of targeting and daylights and so forth, kind of making your own daylights, if you will. I'm going to skip that one and go to the conditional horizontal target. I'll left click on that. Now, in the conditional horizontal target, you'll see that the side is important because the left won't go to the right unless you tell it otherwise. So I'm going to the right-hand side here for this particular shoulder. The layout, width, and grade are not going to affect your geometry of your design at all. This is the visual programming part of what's going on here. Now, hopefully I didn't lose a whole bunch of people when I said visual programming. This is so much easier than what normal programming is that I almost hesitate to use that term. Basically what you're doing though is you're giving your assembly an if-then statement. If you find this thing that I'm going to tell you what it is, then do this. If you don't find it, then do this other thing. So this is the 12-foot and 1-to-1 is only there so that you can see the labels. If I were to do 3 or 4 found conditions, as I mentioned earlier, I would want to change probably the slope, maybe even the width, to make sure that they don't overlap each other. They have no effect on the geometry at the end. Now, the target found or target not found, that is important. I am going to change this to target not found first, and then I'm going to come in here. I'm going to use the insert option for the assembly. I'll right click and insert, and then pick this point here. Now notice when I do that, a couple of things happen. I get the little white boxes up in the upper right hand corner there. And that means that the selection cycling is on. I'll be able to choose between the subassemblies. The other thing that at first kind of concerns me is that the wrong subassembly part is highlighting. The shoulder is highlighting right now. Well, the selection cycling is going to get us past that. We need to attach this conditional subassembly to the lane. So I'm going to left click on that lane right there. And again, I can highlight between the two with the selection cycling. I actually want this first one, the lane, and that will pop in. You see the shoulder's gone there. If I back up some, there is our target not found. Now, by the way, the 0 and the 999, I kind of skipped over that. That's the maximum distance it needs to look for. In a lot of cases, you won't have to worry about distance, but as sure as we're talking, you're going to have a project at some point that has a horseshoe design, whereas the right-hand side will look for a target, but then see the same target, a couple hundred feet away. In that case, if you are having a conditional subassembly jump to the same target just a long way away, you weren't expecting it, you could come in and say, don't look past a certain distance. That's what these numbers here are indicating. So when the target that I point to is not found, I'm going to get just a regular shoulder here. I'm going to hit escape. I'm going to come in and click on the drop down, pick target found. Notice I'm not doing anything different. I'm not changing the layout or the grade. I'm just coming in and selecting on that pavement again. Oh, and it kind of made a jump on me there. I'm going to hit escape. What's nice is the subassemblies here do the move command nicely. So I'm going to grab the conditional. I'll do move, and I'll snap that to this point here. May have gotten those out of order there, but we'll be able to figure that out when we get to the assembly. So the not found is still the shoulder. The found condition is going to be what goes on in the driveways that I'm looking for in here. Well, this is one of those things I can use this pavement, or I could build my own subassemblies for this. I'll select on that pavement, go to copy to. I'm going to scroll in here and make sure that I get that circle. Just like all the other points, I want to snap to this and snap to it correctly. That lane, it's a 12-foot lane. Really, it's going to be targeted to something later on. But I like to show other users that are coming in, or also to remind myself, quite frankly, that this is not a lane. It's not another lane that's being added to the roadway, but this is something special like a driveway in this particular case. So I'll go into the subassembly, which I have to hit escape because I have the assembly selected. I'll go to the subassembly properties, parameters tab, and I'm going to make this width 5 feet. And the default slope a positive 2%, just to graphically indicate that it's not a normal lane and something special is going on with it. Really, everything that I put there is moot because it will be targeting both horizontal and vertical, and so you'll be changing that. Now, I would also add other things to the back side of that, sidewalk if there is one, or other maybe grading or daylight indications past that. So now we have that in place. What I'm going to do here is go into the, to build a corridor. Actually, I should point out the targets that I'm going to use. I've got some targets in here. One of them I've moved so that you can see it. It's this line right here. That is just a polyline. In fact, if I select it, right click and do select similar, you can see that I actually have some other polylines kind of camouflaged in that the sidewalk endpoint there. Those are my driveway fronts. Now I put this one here so you can see it clearly, so that we can see also that it will turn on the not the found condition, but it's not a geometric connection. You won't see the lane go over there immediately. So those are things that you can watch for as we do this. I'm going to go up and build the corridor. And of course, you'd name that correctly. I'm going to come down here, make sure the alignment is correct, the profile is correct, and the assembly is correct. Oh, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Which one is it? It's the East Assembly. If you have any doubt whatsoever, though, select the green button to select it from the screen and select on the assembly there. It pops back up. Yeah, I was right with the name. Just wanted to make sure. I'll click, oh, the target surface, although I don't really have any daylights in this one. I will click that one as well. I'll click OK. It comes in here. Now, we haven't built it yet, so there's an orange marker here. Don't worry about that yet if you haven't seen that before. I'm going to go over to the targets. And in here, you'll notice that I've got conditional horizontal target and conditional horizontal target. Unfortunately, I've got two of the same name. What did I do? Well, exactly what I told you before. I forgot to fix the name here. So I'm going to say, okay there, I'm actually going to cancel out. And I'm going to go into the subassemblies. This is the not found condition. I'll go into that subassembly property. And again, you can go to the green context ribbon or the right-click menu as I did. I'm going to go to the information tab. I'm going to shortcut the conditional horizontal target. I'll say that this is not found, NF for not found, or you can spell it out. I'll do that to the right, so RT. I'll click OK. I'm going to select on the other one, go to the subassembly properties. You could also do this in the assemblies directly. I'll do CHT, F for found, and RT for that. So again, if there's any to the left, I'm not going to confuse those when I'm making those choices. So in this, I'm going to go back to the corridor and make sure my assignments are all correct. Just assembly there, target surface. I'll say OK. And in the targets, I'll come in, and now much easier to figure out which one's which. The first one is the found one, and actually it got out of order because of that little switch that I did, but now I can tell that. I was in a real chance of saying, oh, the first one was not found, and assigning the wrong thing there. So naming there did get me out of a problem. I'm going to go in and tell it that I want to find the feature lines or polylines. Actually, these are polylines. And I can select them individually from the drawing. I only have 4, so that's a possibility. That might not be a bad option. Now, if you've got more than you want to click on there, though, setting the lines or those polylines to a specific layer can allow you to target them here much more easily. In fact, you see that I've got those polylines on 2 different layers, one that's a driveway left and one that's a driveway right. I'm going to pick the 4 to the right and say OK. And notice it populates that with the polylines. I'll say OK to that. Now, I'm going to make a mistake here. I'm calling my shot. Sometimes I make mistakes by accident. This one is on purpose. The not found condition, I'm not going to target. I'm going to pretend that, well, either I missed it or I just chose not to do it there so that I can show you the result of that. Also, I'm not going to come down here, the lane to the right, I'm not going to target that yet because I don't want the geometry to happen yet so you can see what that looks like. So right now I'm going to stop that. I'll say OK. I'll say OK, the corridor will be rebuilt. And I'm looking at this and boy, something's weird there. It doesn't look right. I mean, like there's no difference there. The driveway should have been much shorter than the shoulder that's there. What's going on there? In fact, if I zoom over here, I know there's driveways in here somewhere, but where are they? The problem is that the not found condition is still going on while the found condition is being piled in underneath it. Now, the other thing that happened here, I should call this out, this was what makes it hard to troubleshoot, is those lines are very close to one another. Sometimes you'll get lucky and the conditional assemblies, the conditional results will be very different, but this line right here is actually very close to the edge of shoulder. They're offset a little, but not enough that I can really tell it. So I'm going to come into the subassembly and use the section editor to take a look and identify where things have gone south. Now, I clicked on this particular region, so this is where this view is located. I'm going to zoom in very close here. I have to go a little bit down because there's some elevation that's going to happen here. And then I'll go to zoom to an offset and elevation so that I can follow this along while I'm troubleshooting. I'm also going to zoom in just a touch here. Where this line starts is where the target should begin. So I'm going to use the arrow to advance myself 1 station. Not much difference there. Another one more station, and there you can see it. Here's my up slope driveway pavement, and the shoulder is still there. See how close those lines are together? So that those lines actually are right on top of one another if I take a look at it there. See, my station is right at the edge of that. If I advance through this, all of the stations throughout that short little driveway region have that same problem. Now let's fix that while we're looking at it. I'm going to take this bottom view here. Actually, missed a perfect opportunity to use one of the tools that I talked about there. I'll right click and zoom to. I'm going to go into the corridor properties and into the parameters, into the targets, and in here I'm going to go to the not found condition. So I'll say, and again, select by layer. I literally am picking the same layers, the same targets as I did on the one right above. In fact, it's almost easier to select those both, right back to back because you're seeing what you just selected and you'll see it again right away. When I'm targeting in a corridor, I find that I get kind of into a rhythm with these things, and that's the type of thing for conditional subassemblies in particular. So I'll say OK to that. I am also going to come down here to the width target and change that to be targeting That's actually going to an alignment, and that is to the right. Actually, I don't know the name of that one. So I'll select on that, and oh, that is the line. Sorry. I'm thinking of a different part of my project here. I'll select by layer. I'm going to select the right-hand side, and again, it'll do it for all 4 here, so we're maximizing our efficiency. I'll click OK, and then rebuild that. Rebuild the corridor. Notice this one right here. That section view happened immediately, so it cleaned that up right away. Now also, oh, I know what I did. I'm going to go into the Edit Targets button. It's the same as going into the Edit Corridor, but into just the targeting area here. Notice I went to the left lane instead of the right lane here. So I'm going to highlight all these, delete that, and then go to the right-hand lane and pick the right hand. That is a classic switch. What happened was the targeting for that swooped underneath there. So now my left-hand lane is better, and my right-hand driveway is now going all the way to that geometry there. In fact, we can see it again here. The geometry is not nearly as far this time, but instead of going 5 feet or 10 feet or whatever it was that I had, it's going to just the sidewalk front there and ending there. Also, I look at this. That driveway now is not only 5 feet up at a 2%, but it goes all the way back to where that's located. I would probably want a vertical target here, a profile target, to fortify this and make that go up to the tie-in point back there. But that's the kind of thing that happens with the proper use of the targeting for conditional subassemblies as well as the geometry parts. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody. I want to open up to questions as well. If you have questions, either email us or type the questions into the question box in the GoToMeeting box. I will get back to anyone. Also, my email is on the screen, so you could email me directly instead of going through the GoToMeeting itself. And the QR code is basically to get that information so you don't have to type it over. My company name is long enough that it's easy to misspell and you wouldn't get the email to me. So any questions, please feel free to get those to me. I'll leave this on the screen for a little bit as we wrap up our webinar. Thank you very much.
Hey Russ, this is Matt. I just had one thing. Great job on the presentation. And also we've got a call for proposals out right now for the workshop that'll be in October this year. So if you haven't seen an email through ACEC, we do have that call for proposals out. So if you want to teach at the workshop, this is your opportunity to do so. You know, if you don't or somebody at your firm does, this is kind of your chance to get out there and get a chance to teach at the workshop. So I suggest you look that out. It's on the ACEC website. If you don't have the information, either email Russ and he can kind of get the information to me and we can go from there. So that's all I have, Russ.
Excellent. Yeah. And I'll put in a personal plug for it. The ACEC workshop, if you have not gone to it, is the best meeting of the minds of all the Civil 3D users. So for those of you who can teach, please do, because it's a great way to share your knowledge and be a hero to the other users in your organization and your industry. But if you're not into speaking for it, you know, put it on your calendar. Make sure you talk to your organization and make sure that you can come, because it's a great learning opportunity. So.
Yeah, great point, Russ, and great plug. I appreciate it. So. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.